So when you say like you've onboarded the Justin Bieber Peaches song, how does that work?
They've acquired like all the royalty streams to Justin Bieber's features, as well as a partial ownership of the rights to like create derivative works. And so now anyone who participated in that fundraise at $7 million that filled up really quickly, they're gonna have whatever proportional share of that ownership. So it's almost like a fractionalized RWA in the sense of like many people are getting the upside and also the rights. And we're gonna bring that on chain once they're ready to move the IP which they already own off chain into Story.
All right, here we are with Jason Zhao, co-founder and chief protocol officer at Story Protocol. Jason, welcome to the Defiant podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Camila. Excited to be on.
Yeah, super curious about how Story works. Story is a blockchain-based platform aimed to revolutionize how intellectual property is managed and traded and accessed. It was founded not long ago, 2022, but raised a ton of money, 140 million in two separate rounds, huge name investors, including Andreessen Horowitz. It looks like you have a really ambitious vision with what you're doing with Story. So if we can just start at the very beginning from your background and what led you to start building Story.
Absolutely. So my background is actually more in the AI space. So my two interests before coming into the blockchain world, number one, I studied philosophy in university. And then number two, I studied AI. So I got a master's in computer science at Stanford where I was doing some computer vision research. And after graduating, I actually went immediately to work at DeepMind, which is Google's AI lab. And what I was doing there was I was a product manager, and my whole job there was to take the research that had come out of AlphaZero and AlphaGo, which were these game playing large AI models. Essentially, AlphaZero and AlphaGo were, playing chess and playing Go and beating the world's best chess and Go players. And taking those reinforcement learning algorithms and finding ways to actually build new products from that research, right? So not just, hey, here's an awesome research outcome, but how can you actually use this cutting edge AI research and generate a tangible consumer outcome, generate revenue as well. And so I've always been sort of really interested in how you can actually go from 0 to 1 research ideas and actually scale that from 1 to 1,000 in a product. And it was around DeFi summer, actually, when I got really interested in blockchain again. So I'd interacted with blockchain in 2017, 2016. I had been mining Dogecoin using my grandma's laptop. I had done some ICO stuff, but I was more of a casual user. It was more just to sort of play around. And I didn't really think much about blockchain until DeFi summer. And I started rereading the Bitcoin white paper, started rereading the Ethereum white paper, as well as the Uniswap and Maker protocol white papers. And what really struck me was two things. One is I love the philosophical vision behind what crypto is doing, not just sort of the libertarian vision of Bitcoin, but also, I mean, as you put it in your book, this sort of like world's computer, this infinite garden, right? This idea that you can actually use blockchains to build the substrate of a new internet. And so my philosophy background, I focus mostly on political theory, and I saw a lot of the same elements come to life in crypto that I didn't see in AI or other parts of the technology world. So that was really exciting, and that's what drew me in. And then the other thing that was exciting was just the pace at which research could go into production. So, for Uniswap, Hayden Adams like literally learned how to code by building Uniswap, right? And so you can publish a white paper, publish a smart contract, and it's this sort of immutable, autonomous piece of software that millions of people can now fork, build on top of, even, try to hack it, right? And so you have this Darwinian open source, like evolutionary world in which software is being built on top of each other, and there's this composability, which was really exciting. So that's how I got into the space. I quit DeepMind, didn't really have much of an idea of what specifically I wanted to build, but I knew I wanted to work in blockchain. And in particular, I knew that I wanted to build a blockchain that was built for something other than money, because everything I'd seen was DeFi, right? It was, let's take down Wall Street, let's replace banks. To me, I have this vision, I think very aligned with like Chris Dixon over at A16Z, who's, our lead investor. But it's this idea that, we're building a computer, and computers, they replace these traditional systems. Of course, they can replace money and banking, but what else can they do? And so that's when I started looking at like Mirror Protocol and some of these like more data and IP oriented protocols. And it just seemed like there wasn't any systematic effort to actually bring like content and media and IP on chain. And that's when I got excited by what would eventually become Story. And to me, this was I had further conviction because, during my time in AI, I could see that like data and the IP layer is going to be one of the biggest open questions in AI. And it still is to this day, right? You have OpenAI getting sued by New York Times. You have OpenAI also paying Fox News like $10 million a year. So like, how are they kind of suing New York Times and then paying Fox? Like there's no real answers in the traditional IP world. And I think the time is ripe, both from a technology perspective on the blockchain side, but also in terms of a problem space to build a blockchain that can take this, $61 trillion asset class of intellectual property and actually make it programmable and move it on chain in the same way that, stable coins are taking US dollars and making them programmable and bringing them on chain. So I think that's kind of how the thesis story started, and that was early 2022, and we've just launched our mainnet. It feels like years ago because so much has happened, but like just a week ago, and so we're at the very beginning of this journey, and obviously it's just like very early days to see how this thesis can play out.
Super interesting. Okay, so can you get more into the details of how story actually works?
Yeah, so the high level architecture of story is basically we have this full stack architecture. So we're sort of owning the entire stack end to end from top to bottom. So at the very bottom of the stack, the most base layer is a purpose built layer one. And this layer one has some execution layer customizations to make optimizations around IP transactions. So paying royalties, we make it really cheap. Generating licenses, checking whether licenses are compatible with each other. All these things are being done at the layer one level. So it's like kind of in the same way GPU is optimized for AI training, we're optimizing this layer one blockchain for IP and IP payments. And then on top of that, we have this proof of creativity protocol. So this is a smart contract protocol that's embedded natively into the layer one as a first class citizen. And what the proof of creativity protocol does is it essentially has two major functions. The first is to create a global repository of IP. So one of the biggest problems with IP is that every government, every company within each government, and maybe even every person within that company has a different way of registering IP. They have different metadata fields, they have different policies, and so you have a ton of fragmentation, and that hurts. In the same way that stablecoins make international payments way easier because you don't have to use Swift and deal with like international regulations, I think IP is right for the same disruption. So we have a global metadata standard for IP. And so all of the IP that's being registered on Story is stored in one transparent global database, right? So that's composable. So any app can leverage IP that's registered from another app if they're both using Story. So it's this IP repository. And then number two is, well, I mean, great, you have IP in a repository, but what's the benefit of being in that repository beyond standardization? So this is sort of like the modules of our protocol. And I would almost phrase them as like the verbs of the protocol. They allow you to do things with that IP. And so the second part of the proof of creativity protocol is letting people set terms for how their IP can be monetized by others on chain, and then executing those terms autonomously. So to give an example, if I like create a drawing and I register on Story, I might say, hey, Camila, you can use this IP if you pay me 5 USDC and share 50% of the revenue. And so you can actually embed those terms. So now everyone can discover my artwork and everyone can see how I can use it, what the terms are. And if they want to generate a license to use my work, then they need to meet those terms, and those terms are enforced. So that's the second part, is like, actually, how do you like do things? How do you program this IP so that other people can use it? And I think the beauty there is that once you register your IP with your terms, now we have, it's growing, but we have tens and hopefully hundreds in the future of apps that can now read from this database and say, oh, like this character would love to pull that into my comic book app and let any of my comic book app users create a comic out of your character. And we know how much we need to pay you. We can stream the revenues to you. And so now you have this model where IP holders can register their IP once and monetize it everywhere, right, through Story. So that's kind of what Story does, and that's the architecture that we've built to enable that.
Okay, so the base layer is like any layer one blockchain. I guess like it's a proof of stake, or what kind of
It's a proof of stake
consensus?
blockchain, yeah. And we're using Comet BFT for consensus. It's also supported by the Cosmos SDK. It's around 2 to 3 second block times and really fast finality. So it gets, it's a little bit more efficient than Ethereum. But we do use for the execution layer in the computing environment, or I should say execution environment, we do use the EVM, but we just modified it significantly to optimize for IP. So we have a combination, kind of like a hybrid model, where we're taking, I think, the most scalable consensus and also the most scalable execution, and just putting them together.
Oh, cool. Okay, so you have this proof of stake blockchain, but the thing that you are securing is not monetary transactions, but IP, right? Like the thing that goes into the blocks is whatever IP users are downloading, is the verb, or like
Yeah, like
si-
whatever they're on-ramping or
on
registering is being
registering.
stored on this smart contracts protocol, which is then, of course, secured by the blockchain itself. So it's it's a little bit like a layer of abstraction above the blockchain level. But ultimately, the purpose of the blockchain is to in the same way that Visa and MasterCard are processing a bunch of payments from different merchants and different customers, right? It's like connecting all these banks together and being a payment network. I kind of see Story, you can almost think about it as a network where, you might have a creator who's registered IP on creator tool, right, on this side of the world, and then there's another app that wants to like let someone else use that IP in a song or use that IP in a book on the totally another app, and Story is the one that's facilitating that transaction. So there are payments happening for IP, but ultimately the most important asset, the atomic unit of Story, is the IP asset.
I see. And is this like, is the what's stored actually is like a document that says it's like a legal document, I guess, that says, what the thing is? Or is it actually like if I wanted to write another book and register the IP of the book in Story, would I have to store like the actual book in Story, or like, yeah, what actually is the thing that is secured?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we do store a pointer to the media file. And right now, the default options are Arweave and IPFS. They're decentralized storage solutions. So you would store using one of those decentralized storage solutions. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. But then what's stored beyond the pointers of the media file is a whole long list of standardized metadata, right? So imagine you're registering with the US Copyright Office, which I'm sure you've experienced with. I mean, it's not a very good process, but they're asking for a lot of information, like what type of work is this? Who's created it when? How can other people use this? What do they have to pay? What are the terms of payment? All this metadata, this standardized metadata that defines what an IP is, that's all stored with the media file, right? So, because I think the sort of misconception people have is like, a lot of people think NFTs solved IP, but I think what NFTs solved is like having a pointer to a media file, right? Like that's what most NFTs are. They don't really have the robust rights on chain. It's like, here's a token that has a URI to, an IPFS image, right? And I can mint a token of Mickey Mouse and I can own it in my wallet. But what information does that tell me? It doesn't tell me who created Mickey Mouse. It doesn't tell me whether I have the rights to use Mickey Mouse. It doesn't tell me anything other than here's a media file that you can open up and it looks like Mickey Mouse. And so I think what Story does is it adds this like semantic layer on top of just the pure media file of, okay, who created this? How can it be used? And how can it be monetized? And that is the standard metadata that forms the sort of IP repository that I'm talking about.
So you mentioned NFTs, and I think what drew people to NFTs was the ability to trade and hold and own these tokens that are meant to be unique, right? So in Story Protocol's case, what happens with these IP documents? Like, are they fractionalized and tokenized so that they can be traded, or is that kind of a separate part of how this works?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the core primitive that we've built as a team and a foundation is basically this idea of how do you on-ramp IP on chain. And I would almost analogize it to stablecoins, right? Like stablecoins, you have this US dollar that's an existing, obviously massive existing asset, and you want to get all the benefits of the US dollar and all the legitimacy of the US dollar and the stability of the US dollar, but you want to have the benefits of blockchain too. You want to be able to send it to everyone in the world, right? Where you can't do that with the US dollar that's off chain. So think about Story as doing a similar function almost, where we're taking IP, which is currently backed by a bunch of legal documents and is super opaque, and like, how do I know, who owns what IP? How do I access it? How do I pay for it? Unless I have a team of lawyers, like, and I go knock on someone's door, I can't really access it, right? Now we're bringing it on chain, but it's still accessing the legitimacy of the legal system. So we actually do have I should have mentioned, we have a programmable IP license, which is a license framework that we've created that maps one-to-one with all of our smart contracts. So every single parameter that's set on chain, it's not just like some on-chain parameter, it's actually a legal parameter too. So if I go on Story and I register my IP and I say, hey, I want you to pay 5 USDC to use it, that's actually baked into a licensing agreement. And anyone who agrees to that, there's a real licensing agreement that the two of us have created. So you can actually, everything on Story is backed and enforceable by the law. And that's really important, right? In the same way that a stablecoin, right? If you're using USDT or USDC, but, it's not backed by anything, then, you're probably not going to have full confidence in what you're using. And so we're bringing the IP asset on chain. We're backing it with this programmable IP license. We're backing it with the law. And then we're letting our entire ecosystem and, the imaginations of all of the builders build new utilities given this primitive of on-chain IP. So we actually have a lot of DeFi, or what we call IP-Fi protocols, that are, allowing people to, number one, fractionalize IP, to back meme coins, not by, taking people's IP, but actually like IP-backed tokens, IP-backed meme coins. We have more institutional types of DeFi protocols, but one called Aria, it's an IP RWA protocol. And essentially, we've already brought on Justin Bieber's Peaches, which is one of Justin Bieber's songs. We brought on a Dua Lipa song. We've brought on a couple Blackpink songs as well. And now you can actually access not just the yield for those songs every time someone listens to them on, let's say, Spotify, but also the rights to those songs on chain. And you can imagine a whole host. There's also marketplaces that make the licenses to IP, so the rights to IP, liquid and tradable. So every time you generate a license token, you can actually trade the license for that token on a marketplace. So now you've kind of unraveled this multi-trillion-dollar asset class that it used to be super opaque, super inaccessible, high transaction costs, right? In the sense of you need lawyers, right? That's like the ultimate gas cost, is like having to pay for lawyers. And now you can go on a blockchain, and now software is your intermediary, and DeFi is now unlocking like all these different things you can do with this asset class. Take your IP and collateralize it and get a loan, right? Like these are all things you can already do on Story. So now we're sort of opening up this asset class to be like an accessible financial asset that now anyone can touch and access and program. So that's kind of the core vision. Obviously still early days, but really hoping to push like a mature DeFi IPFi ecosystem where IP is a financial asset that can fuel a whole host of utility.
PR Genius is a top crypto PR and growth marketing agency, helping brands globally with expert PR and strategic growth marketing. They've worked with 300 plus projects like Movement Labs and IO.net. Unlike traditional agencies, they charge only on performance. Their services include earned PR opportunities and marketing services to help boost wallet holders and organic X followers. Learn more at www.theprgenius.com.
Let's take a couple of steps back because a lot to unpack there. First piece is the legal aspect. These primitives are backed by actual legal contracts. So that's important because, as creators start registering their IPs, if those creations are misused or people are not paying the due royalties to the creator, there's a way for those creators to actually go to a court and make sure that their rights are met. And how can they do that in because of a decentralized blockchain? How do you know in which jurisdiction those documents are enforced and how can you make sure that you're protecting the rights of creators globally?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that the programmable IP license works is it's kind of like a YC safe, in the sense of you got to fill in the blanks, right? So you have this legal template and it's very commonly used. The YC safe doesn't say your company's valued at 10 million and you're going to raise 1 million, right? So you have to fill in the blanks. And so the blanks, so to speak, in the programmable IP license are who is the creator, who is the person licensing from the creator, what are the economic terms? These are all set on the proof of creativity protocol. And then the license actually is designed, it's kind of first of its kind, to read from the on-chain state and then populate the blanks based on what's on chain, right? And so now you have this fill in the blanks legal template where the blanks are being filled in based on the terms set in the smart contract. And if the terms are violated, your question is good, which is how does this work around the entire world? And right now, as a starting point, we're focused on copyright, and in particular, we're focused on US-based copyright law. So, that's where we're really confident this is going to work. And actually, we're pretty eager to support creators if they're in a lawsuit around the programmable IP license. We want to support them and show that this is really, it works, it's powerful. But the good thing is IP law, especially copyright law, of course, it's very complex, but the core principles of copyright law are pretty harmonized internationally. And the reason why is because if you create Pikachu in Japan, you don't want it to be used in the US with no consequences, right? Because Pikachu is a global IP. And so it should be enforced mostly everywhere. So for the most part, by starting with the US, you actually get a lot of coverage where almost every major nation to some degree respects the same copyright principles as the US and vice versa. The thing that differs is enforcement, right? So some countries don't really enforce IP infringement as much, and that's unfortunate. There's not too much we can do about that, but we do think our programmable IP license, it fits the fundamental principles that are harmonized across most countries. So we feel pretty confident it should stand well in most countries. That being said, it is optimized and battle tested for the US.
I see. So a creator would be able to like download and print a document that's derived from Story Protocol and bring it to court and enforce that. But right now you're saying it's mostly optimized for copyright law in the US, but that hopefully, because copyright is meant to protect rights globally, then you'd be protecting creators globally, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's truly our goal, is let us do the dirty work of harmonizing the legal stuff so that you have this composable, singular, atomic on-chain environment, right? And I think that's the goal, is like we want to live in I think blockchains are good at creating global markets for different types of assets. And so we're gonna, as a foundation and a team, have to do a lot of like legal grunt work. But I think that's the opportunity, is now you've integrated these different legal codes into a common software-based language, software-based computer. And that's what Story's trying to do.
Goat Network is the first sustainable BTC yield chain using decentralized sequencers and multi-coin POS. It transforms BTC and Doge into yield-generating assets by tokenizing sequencer revenues, unlocking BTC-Fi and meme-Fi's potential. Supply BTC or Doge, earn BTC forever.
Yeah, I want to get deeper into the DeFi side of things, IP-Fi. And yeah, I just think it's fascinating. I was looking at your DeFi Llama page, seeing that there's 11 million of TVL locked. You just launched mainnet last week, but there's already some activity. There's a lending protocol I see called Unleash. There's a couple of DEXs. You mentioned this RWA dApp as well. And yeah, I see, a few tokens there with, different degrees of market cap, which I guess when like the tokens here are the different IPs that you mentioned, like the Justin Bieber song and so on. So when you say like you've onboarded the Justin Bieber Peaches song, how does that work? Like what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we've done right now, this step that, I would say Aria, the protocol that is working on this, is they haven't fully moved on chain yet, but they've already they've fundraised. So they had a vault with Stakestone, which filled up, I think it was like $7 million in 9 minutes. So they filled up a sort of retail fundraise to acquire. So now we've acquired those assets, or Aria has. And the next step is to bring them on chain. But that's actually the easy part, to be honest. The hard part is, how do you set up a corporate structure that can acquire these IP assets and then stream the royalties from that IP asset to Story and Story holders, as well as put the rights on Story. So the kind of breakdown of how this works is, for music, there's a few funds that are pretty large, billion-dollar funds in the world, and they actually use music as a financial asset class because music has recurring revenues from streams. So they'll just acquire like a ton of rights and royalties to some of the world's top songs. And then essentially what Aria is doing is kind of fundraising from people who want to have a share of those rights and the upside, and then they acquire from these big catalogs. And so what Aria's done is, for Justin Bieber's Speeches, to use that as an example, they've acquired like all the royalty streams to Justin Bieber's Speeches, as well as a partial ownership of the rights to like create derivative works. And so now anyone who participated in that fundraise at $7 million that filled up really quickly, they're going to have whatever proportional share of that ownership. So it's almost like a fractionalized RWA, in the sense of like many people are getting the upside and also the rights, and we're going to bring that on chain once they're ready to move the IP, which they already own off chain, into Story. So that's kind of how that works, and it's a little similar to other RWA protocols, I would say, like Ondo or Mantra, where most of the friction is actually like streamlining the legal elements in order to fit the on-chain elements.
Just to continue with this example, when Aria brings the Justin Bieber Speeches song into Story Protocol, then like anyone would be able to buy like a fraction of that in the form of tokens and start receiving royalties from people who are listening to that song?
That's right. That's right. And I think that part is interesting. So, with the IPRWA, you have basically two major benefits. The first is pretty familiar to folks in crypto, which is yield, right? Like as IP is a yield-bearing asset, people want to listen to Justin Bieber, and so they pay indirectly. And of course, you're going to get the revenue streams for that. But I think what's exciting with IP in particular is that unlike a treasury bill, like, first of all, T-bills are super accessible, right? Like most people can buy a T-bill if they really want to. And then with bring it on chain, you're getting the yield, but that's about all you can do, right? Like you can't really do much with a T-bill. With an IP, first of all, it's not super accessible, right? Like when else are you going to be able to buy Justin Bieber? You can't really just go on Spotify and buy it, right? So that I think it's unique is bringing it on chain, making it accessible. But more importantly, IP is a flexible asset, right? People remix songs all the time. And so what we want to do is not just bring the economics of IP on chain, but also the rights, because that's super exciting is what if with a single click, you could actually pay and get the rights to Justin Bieber's song, right? To do a derivative of it or, to remix it in some way. And so that's like the true ambition of what Aria is trying to do is, yes, number one, start with the yield, give yield that's currently inaccessible and assets that are currently accessible to people. But then number two is like the more rights we can acquire and bring onto Story, the more those rights can be programmable. And that's really exciting too, because now instead of needing to talk to Justin Bieber's lawyers and negotiate with him to use the song, you can actually use Story, and Story's intermediary.
It seems a little bit far-fetched that anyone who buys a token can just have rights to using Justin Bieber's song. So I would guess there's like some sort of threshold that you need to meet, right? Like it's not like I can spend $100 on like Peach's token and suddenly like I can do I can make a derivative work of the song. Or
yeah,
how,
so for
how does that
Justin
work?
Bieber, right, there's like a whole host of people who have like partial claims to the rights already off chain, right? So with Justin Bieber, it's the partial rights to remix a song. And the way partial rights work in music is quite complicated, where technically you need unanimous rights to do anything, but like in practice, because there's usually like so many different stakeholders, it's usually like ask for forgiveness, right? So there's sort of some gray area there. What I will say though is that's why most of our efforts are not fully focused on onboarding mainstream IPs, because mainstream IPs, they come with all this baggage and all these commitments and all this complexity. I think what's going to be really exciting is IPs that start natively on Story. So they're born on Story, their rights are fully on chain to start, and you can easily splice and dice those rights. And so if those IPs get big, then there's no reason why you can't, click a button and get the rights, because that's how they originated. They're software native IPs, they're Story native IPs. So that's kind of the real benefit is like if an IP starts on Story, all of its rights are accounted for on chain, 100% of them. And the original owner or the current owner can now modify those terms in the smart contract, and then if they want to let anyone pay $200 for the rights, then they can do that, right? Obviously, if it becomes really big, they can increase the price. But I think that's the beauty of like having programmable rights and liquid rights, is that if you have these native assets, then you don't have to deal with the baggage of all our 500 people off chain already own this, and now we have to communicate with them and use an oracle or what have you. I think that's why in most content revolutions, like if you think about YouTube, I think the way that they scaled was not by going after Steven Spielberg or going after James Cameron and asking James Cameron to make a 5-minute YouTube video. It was going after like these brand new creators that were just kind of native to YouTube, right? Like the Mr. Beast of the world, the Marquise Brownlees of the world. And now Mr. Beast and Marquise Brownlee probably make more than the average director in Hollywood. But they are sort of building up a native type of content that is suited for YouTube, right? They're not trying to make a Hollywood film. They're not trying to fit that, square peg into a round hole. And so I think similarly, my thesis is for Story is that, yeah, you kind of need to bring in Justin Bieber and Blackpink to show that like top IPs are interested and that it's possible. But really, who's going to take full advantage of the platform? I think it's going to be like native applications, native creators that are starting on Story from the very start.
So what's in it for the creator?
For them, I think it's the value prop is two things. One is you can monetize, right? You register your IP, and now you can easily, it's almost like instead of, hiring your own lawyers, you can set your terms on chain. So people can take it or leave it, right? So now you have this ability to monetize around any application that's integrated with Story. Anyone that wants to browse Story assets, the more distribution that each of the apps on Story have, the more distribution that Story itself has, the more people are going to see your asset and be able to monetize it with a single click. And so that's really important. The second is just being able to have the protection, right, of having like an easily generated license a legal contract for every deal that you do without needing a whole legal team, right? So there's this convenience and this protection. But I really think the main benefit is, what is crypto good at? It's helping creators monetize. And now we're adding this layer of programmability to the rights. So they can specify how people can monetize, how much they have to earn, and they can feel protected by the law as a result. I think that is going to be the core benefit.
About distribution, I'd imagine like you will also require different dApps to build solutions for each medium, right? Like, so yeah, like how do you kind of envision this, like this discoverability of the different media that's potentially going to be registered on Story?
Yeah, this is definitely a sort of ecosystem question that we're going to have to answer. And, my stance is blockchains are not really like distribution technologies. They need existing distribution platforms, right? Which is why so much of crypto is on Twitter. Like Web 2 innovation is about distribution. It's just making the UX of spreading ideas and content so fast. That's what TikTok does. That's what Twitter does. That's what Instagram does. That's what Facebook does. Every single Web 2 app that succeeds is a distribution innovation. It's Google as a search engine. It's Facebook as a social media platform. I don't think personally, like blockchain should try to be a distribution technology. I think they should try to be the back end for many different distribution technologies, right? So micropayments on Twitter should happen with stablecoins, right? So blockchain's sort of piggybacking off of Web 2 distribution, but you have the Web 3 monetization and Web 3 economics. Like, Story is a blockchain. Like, we're not distributing content to people. Like, people are registering content, assetizing it, setting the terms for how others can use it. But then we kind of rely on an ecosystem of apps that people are getting served content on, right? And so that's like kind of our core task as a team is how do we actually build developer tooling so that it's really easy for the future TikToks of the world to register all their IP on Story and let people monetize it, right? So you're absolutely right. Like, we kind of need to have a focused thesis on where we start. I don't think we can tackle every medium at once. I think the ones that we're really looking at now are like visual content and music, and we want to just find strong applications, either native applications that are new or integrations with existing apps where we can really say that, they're helping us get distribution and we're sort of the economic backbone, but we're not the star of the show. Like, it's almost like Stripe. Like Stripe, Stripe it's not like go to stripe.com to pay, right, to check out. It's like Stripe is just sort of enabling the payments, but it relies on being the payment provider for a bunch of different e-commerce stores, right? That are the end user experiences, buying this hoodie or buying this shoe. And no one's going to an app to use Stripe. It's just part of the experience. So that's kind of how I see Story. And you're absolutely right. Like, we need to find our way into these apps and to get the adoption that we need to succeed.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Story is kind of the backbone for the assetization or
Exactly.
tokenization or like the financialization of IP, making that process simpler or streamlined. But yeah, like in the end, if you're a creator, you want distribution, and yeah,
You
you
want
will need
distribution,
kind
yeah.
of that kind of Web 2 size of market or kind of reach
Yeah, exactly.
for your
Exactly.
thing to actually be consumed.
And I don't think people are
yeah.
going to say, oh, I'm like using Story. Like, no one's like, oh, I love using Stripe, right? Like Stripe, even if they do, they don't even, the best case scenario for Stripe is it's invisible, right? It's like, it just helps you pay. And so I think for Story, it's like, yeah, you might be using a social media app and you might be posting content and you might not even know it's being registered on Story, but the social media app might tell you, hey, for your post, you've earned $100 over the past month because people on these other apps have been using your content, right? And they've been paying you for it. So that would be like the dream comes true scenario for us, is that we're sort of this invisible fabric that connects IPs across different applications.
Okay, so I'm kind of imagining it like the analogy to Stripe is helpful because yeah, like Stripe is kind of embedded in across any application, like any website you use. The payments step is probably involves Stripe. So like
Yes.
if we did that with Story, maybe after posting something on Instagram or like on whatever social media or on YouTube, maybe there would be a step where you have to fill out your requirements for others to use your post or your creation
Exactly.
or
Exactly.
whatever medium you're doing.
Yes.
And that would be Story, but Story wouldn't be kind of on the front and center. Like, you'd be posting on wherever you post, but then Story would be integrated as a way to set your terms as a creator so that down the line you can get better compensated for your work.
Absolutely. And this is something that we started to pilot with like Lens and Farcaster is, on the posting flow, there's like a little toggle that says like register on story. And then you can set your terms. If you click that toggle and it not only posts to Lens and registers on Lens, but also is an IP asset on story.
Get as much as 20% APY on ETH with the High Growth Vault by Kelp in one click. High Gain uses blue chip DeFi strategies with RS-ETH across Aave, Pendle, Usual, and Elixir, managed by strategy pros Ultra Yield and Upshift to deliver highest rewards on ETH, all in just one click. Deposit your ETH, receive HGETH, and stay liquid in DeFi. Trade or use HGETH on platforms like Pendle and Balancer while still stacking rewards. Follow along these steps to get started.
Okay, and then on kind of the trading side of things, then you would probably use a DEX or some exchange to go and find these assets on kind of the
Exactly.
yield side of things.
Exactly. Yeah. And we already do have some early marketplaces that are, allows you to trade both the underlying IP asset and all control of it, or a licensed token, right? That gives you just not the underlying ownership of the asset, but the rights associated with it. And obviously, this is early days, so they're somewhat illiquid right now. Like IP is not as liquid as a fungible, but then you can imagine solutions that fractionalize IP and make them fungible. So
And because I have like really no idea what this would look like, but what are and I know that it's gonna be a huge range, but like what would yield for a song look like? Like what do royalties for a song look like?
yeah, so for most major songs, it's like 4 or 5%. So it's not like a meme coin, right? It's not gonna be something that's like 10,000x, but it is consistent. And I think, that's why the yield is interesting, I think, because it allows people to feel closer to the artist. So there's some sort of intrinsic boost to how like valuable that can be. But also that's also why I think the rights part is super interesting, because I think what people want is not just an economic asset. There's so many economic assets out there. They want something that's meaningful, and it's going to be more meaningful if they can actually build on top of it, right? Rather than just passively earn yield. So that to me is like the next step. Obviously, it's harder to do with like Justin Bieber because there's so many restrictions on what we can do. But as like IP franchises start natively on story, and one of them is I'm excited about is David Goyer, who's the creator behind the Dark Knight trilogy. So he was the screenwriter behind the Dark Knight trilogy. Chris Nolan obviously is the director, and he's actually starting a new IP on story, a new sci-fi IP. So really high quality creators are interested in this model, and like my hope is, if Emergence, which is the name of his IP, if it blows up, then we don't have to worry about the Justin Bieber problem, right? Of like, there's a million different agreements already, even though all of it is already on chain. It's all native. It's like ancestry.com, right? For IP, you can see how it evolved, and you can see the genetics of, who can use it, who contributed. It's almost like a GitHub style genealogy. And then you can truly program the rights, and it's fully on chain.
Very cool. So about kind of this like story's own incentive mechanism and token. So because you're a proof of stake blockchain, so there will be or maybe there has to be an incentive mechanism. You earlier you were talking about your Big Bang event. So I'd love to hear more about this. Like what does incentive within the story protocol look like, and what's kind of the utility of your token going forward?
Totally. So the IP token is sort of the gas token, the native gas token of our layer one, and it's also used to stake. So it's similar to Ethereum in the sense of it's a gas token, it's a staking token. It also has some governance functions as well. And then the one other benefit that's I would say unique on top is that I talked about this proof of creativity protocol that lets you receive royalties, set licensing terms, get paid for licenses. All of the revenue that flows through that system, every time a royalty is paid, every time a license is generated, it's done in IP token as an underlying asset. So that's another use case. But the kind of biggest thing on the horizon for us in terms of like incentives is this Big Bang event. And so we have kind of a unique model that's inspired by like fair launches in DeFi, where, a common problem with validators is that only insiders can stake. And so, or not only insiders can stake, but they stake super early, right? So the foundation or the team or what have you, like they'll all stake super early. They'll drive the staking rewards down, and it's not really fair because other people haven't even had a chance to stake. And so what we've done is right now we're in this singularity period, which is going to end around early March, like March 3rd, March 4th, and at that moment is going to be the big bang event, which is when staking rewards for the entire ecosystem turn on. And so that's going to be a big moment because now there's going to be so much more incentive, obviously, to stake. But hopefully people have the chance to spend this week and the next week to sort of stake on Story and get ready for the big bang. And then we're also going to be introducing some more DeFi incentives as the big bang starts to just kind of kickstart the ecosystem more fully. So that's going to be a big event for us. And I think our ecosystem, especially the people that are using staking, like liquid staking or any staking components in their app. So that's just kind of something to look forward to, because right now there's no staking rewards, right? So it's a little different because we wanted to have this period of like almost quiet where people can choose whether they want to stake or not, and then sort of turn everything on from there.
So like who's staking on Story right now?
We have some more professional validators. I would say we have like around 10 that are, or I should say actually 4 big ones that are like relatively well known, and they just run validators, so they're trusted. But then we have 64 total validators. The rest are all community members. And so we have a lot of community members that have essentially, in testnet period, we had a competition where 200 people entered, and based on their performance and uptime, we selected the top 64. And so those 64, most of them are from the community, and they just went through this process. They're the ones that are validating Story. But on top of just running like a traditional validator, there's also other services on Story. So we have one called the Story attestation service. And this is like more of a unique to IP service where, IP is an interesting concept because like I as an individual can register Mickey Mouse and I can say that, hey, I made this, right? So how do you prevent that very simple edge case from happening? We actually run every IP that's registered on Story through the Story attestation service, which is like a specialized decentralized Oracle network that aggregates, I'll upload Mickey Mouse, and then we'll take that image of Mickey Mouse and send it to a few different partners and try to screen for whether this looks like any existing IP either on Story or any existing IP that we know is popular, right? Of course, Mickey Mouse is a known IP that's popular, and then we'll give it a score. So now every IP on Story has an on-chain attestation of, like, what is the legitimacy score? Does this look like an existing copyright? Is this likely to be infringing? So there's actually this sort of like quality signal throughout the entire system. And in the future, I think it'd be interesting. This is something we had to plan out, but it would be interesting to sort of tie that attestation service to the validators themselves so that the validators are actually running the service natively. Right now, it's kind of built on top of Story as a separate Oracle network. But I think this is one of the reasons why we want it to be our own layer one, is that as we prove out these functionalities. So if the attestation service works really well, we have like the rules we want to embed, we can embed that into the client, right? And so now every validator is not just validating the transactions, but validating the IP in a meaningful way. And, I think that's something that's really exciting as well.
Oh, interesting. But okay, so is this attestation done by, like, how does it work? Is it just like a centralized entity that looks at all of the IPs that are being registered on Story?
So the sort of current conception of it is that we have a few different Web 2 service providers who specialize in IP infringement detection. And so every time an IP is registered, we'll query one or more of them and then aggregate the results and bring it on chain. So that's how it works right now. In the future, I'd love for it to be more decentralized. I'd love for legal firms to be part of like one of the things that gets queried, right? And I think that maybe people can pay more, right? As they are registering, maybe there's a baseline level of check that we just do for everyone in the ecosystem that's cheap and fast, but maybe people can pay more if they want a comprehensive review to build more trust, right? So I think there's so many ways we can take it, but the kind of basic model that we're starting out with is you register IP, we make a few API calls, we aggregate them, and then we put it on chain. And that's the attestation.
So, how is that paid for, and how long does the process take?
So it doesn't take too long. It takes a few hours, and it's paid for with gas. So we just increase the amount of gas, and it's actually very cheap. Like these calls are usually 1 or 2 cents. So right now we're subsidizing it, but in the future it'll be paid for with really cheap registration fees, right? So most of our base transaction fees are sub-cents. So if you add on a couple cents, it's a few cents to register and protect your IP. And it's also a reason for people to register because we check against every asset that's already registered on Story. So if you want to protect your IP, you should register it sooner so it's in that database of things that we're checking for so we can tell you if someone's violating your IP.
Is there a way, like, is it possible to do this with AI, like for this to be automated?
Yeah, we definitely want to introduce AI. Like I could even see a decentralized AI model run by the community. That's one of the sort of independent verifiers that the Oracle is going to query. So that's something that we've discussed for sure. I think just because we're scaling things up, we just went with the trusted partners rather than building from the ground up. But that is certainly something that AI can help with.
Pretty, just like a complex system to make sure
It's
that
very complex. Yeah.
everything is verified and works. So can you tell me more about the tokenomics? Yeah, like how is inflation decided? How are staking rewards distributed? Is there any kind of allocation going to different parties as part of this big bang, or is it all just going into validators? I don't know, just like more details on the
Yeah.
tokenomics.
Yeah, so the tokenomics pretty standard. So our staking, I believe our APY is variable based on how much is staked, right? So we try to at least be higher yield in all cases than Ethereum, just as a baseline. It is a variable staking inflation rate, and then also on the other side, we don't have just inflation, but we also have burn as well. So we implemented 1559, right? And so we have the ability every base fee for every transaction is burned. So we're burning around, like, I would say not so much IP, but like 250 IP per day in transaction fees, so IP tokens. So, there is that deflationary element as well. And in times of high demand, the token itself could become deflationary. The Big Bang event is totally neutral. So whoever's a validator and validating those 64 people, they're going to start earning rewards. And then, of course, they're going to pass it on to people who've delegated to them. So it's a pretty standard in terms of the validator gets the staking reward and the delegates get some portion based on what the validator wants to set. So that's kind of how it all works.
Can anyone become a validator?
Yes, so we're trying to expand the validator sets in the next few months to be not much more, but like let's say around 80 or a little above 80. So we want to expand the validator set, and we really prioritize community validators. Like we had university students running validators that are currently part of the 64 set, and I'd like to see more of that. So anyone can run a validator, and then the ones that get picked are after these initial 64 are the ones with the most stake weight. So basically you have to convince other people or have a lot of stake yourself in the network to basically be one of the top 80. So if you're, interested in becoming a validator, you can run a validator is very easy, and then just attract the right amount of stake so that you're in the top whatever number that we're kind of aiming for.
But right now, if you want to participate in your Big Bang event, like what are the next steps people should take?
I think for now, it's probably most people, like 99% of people, would want to just stake and secure the network now. So we have a staking dashboard, the staking.story.foundation, where you can stake now. If you're not Also, there's another thing I should mention, which is we have time-weighted staking. So this is also inspired by DeFi. So if you stake, you can unstake, anytime with a 14-day unlock, but you're going to get 1x staking rewards. If you stake for, I believe it's a year, you're going to get 2x staking rewards. And so the more you lock, again, there's different intervals. I believe it's like 2 weeks and 3 months, but we have a whole blog post about it. But there's different intervals. The longer you stake, the more you earn, up to 2x. And so you can already start that today on staking dashboard. And then also there's a couple of liquid staking applications. One's called Vario, the other is called Metapool. And so if you're more DeFi or more degen, you can use liquid staking, and you have the access to the liquid stake tokens to do stuff with. But I think for people who are just interested in staking alone, I would recommend doing the time weighted staking and staking for as long as you're comfortable to get those boosts, and then to stake using our staking dashboard.
Cool. What are the next milestones for you in your roadmap?
Yeah, so we're going to publish, probably by now the roadmap is out. And I think the most exciting things, there's two categories of improvements. The first is fundamental improvements to our layer 1. So this is sort of the base infrastructure. We want to increase the throughput, increase the scalability, as I mentioned, increase the decentralization with the number of validators this year. So we want to move very, very quickly. We want to have essentially a major upgrade before the end of the year, sometime in Q3. But more immediately, and honestly more exciting for me, is we're going to ship our first party app. It's going to be called the IP Portal in the coming weeks and months. So sometime in Q2. So basically the IP Portal is like a GitHub for IP. So it has two main functions. One, it allows anyone to seamlessly register IP with no code in this beautiful, elegantly designed flow. So you can easily onboard your IP to Story and set the terms. And number two, it allows you to easily browse your IP. So you can see not your IP, but you can see any of the IP registered from any app on Story. And so that's going to be a real benefit, because now you can browse all the IP assets that are programmable that you can access. And then also you can manage your IP. So if you want to change your terms, if you want to claim your revenue across all the apps that you're earning revenue from, you can do that on the portal. So that's going to come out. The beta version is still early days. That's going to come out in a few weeks. And it's like, I think it shows why we're like a purpose-built layer one, right? We're built to enable this. This is kind of like the homepage for Story. And then also the attestation service, you can actually view, because right now the attestation service is like kind of on chain. So unless you're reading the smart contracts, you might not see it. So you're actually gonna be able to view the attestation service I was talking about through the portal as well. And that's also gonna be shipped at the same time. So that's like the upcoming product release where we're really gonna show like the purpose-built vision that we have and this sort of like vertically integrated L1 that we built.
Very cool. To start wrapping up, I'd love to kind of learn more about your vision for Story and IP rights. Where do you see Story growing to in next 10 years, and also just the larger kind of IP space? If Story kind of does have an impact in the industry as a whole, like what will it look like?
Absolutely. So I think short-term goals, like next 1 or 2 years, is very simple. Actually, it's the mantra of make IP easy to register, and once you register, make it easy to earn. Right. So register IP on Story, and we will help you monetize. Right. Whether that's through licensing, seamless royalties, or whether it's through more IP-fi sources of crypto native yields. Like we want to empower creators by registering their IP and making it programmable on Story. They're going to access new monetization channels, right? So there's two components to that goal for us as a team in an organization is number one, make it really easy to register IP, which you're going to see with the IP portal is what we're doing. And then number two is like find the best applications in our ecosystem or build them with the ecosystem if we don't find them to enable monetization for IP. So like what are the best ways that anyone can monetize their IP and how do we let people access that on Story? So those are the short-term goals, right? Register IP, make it really easy for creators to earn for quality IP. That's the short-term goal. If we can nail that down, then there's going to be more and more IP coming onto Story. And as more and more IP comes onto Story, there's going to be more and more apps that want to capitalize on that IP and therefore drive more demand, right? So you're going to have this positive flywheel. The long-term vision is quite ambitious, which is, like I said, the reason I got into the space is because I think blockchains are going to be the core protocols for a new type of internet. And so like what Story's trying to do is not necessarily build like a application or two applications or three applications. It's trying to build a core standard for the internet. And I kind of think of like the domain name system or HTTP. Like no one's a huge fan of HTTP, right? Like it just kind of works. It's like part of everything. No one's like thinking every day about how great the domain name system is and how it organizes all the names. I mean, it's just kind of like a fabric of the internet type innovation. And I think that's where Story wants to be is you're on Twitter, you're on whatever social platform, you're on Netflix, and there's a little IP badge at the very bottom corner where you can see all the metadata, right? And you can actually click out from that app. And if it's an image on TikTok or on Instagram, you can actually go and pull it into some other app seamlessly, right? So we're sort of the global IP system. And when you register with Story, we also auto-publish your IP to the US Copyright Office and the EU Copyright Office. And, we're sort of it's almost like stablecoins. We're sort of the back end of the IP system of all these governments because it's just easier for them to settle on chain their IP and to transact on chain their IP. So to be the standard of truth for not just the consumer applications of the future, but also for the governments that are interested in IP, right? In the same way that the US government may use stablecoins in the future. And it's integrated with the US dollar, right? It's part of the US dollar system, but it's this on-chain component that's probably going to I think stablecoins are going to be higher TVL than, non-crypto US dollars at some point in the future, right? And that's going to take time, but I think the on-chain IP is going to be more valuable, more numerous than off-chain IP, and Story will be the sort of source of truth for that. That's the vision.
That's super exciting. I think it's really interesting to see a Web3, startup or project, whatever, but building something that's not strictly finance related, even though there is finance and DeFi involved to provide liquidity and kind of in like enable the protocol to work, but that the core thing is something other than financial assets. I think I'd love to see more of that. So really cool to learn about what you're building, and I think there's a lot of potential there. Obviously, I think this is the kind of thing where you can unlock a lot of value applying blockchain rails to it, because it's just been such an illiquid, opaque industry that it'll be really interesting to see what happens when you can actually bring it on chain, and
Yeah,
make
yeah,
it more
yeah.
permissionless, like make it more global. So yeah, super excited to see where this goes. So far, it's super promising. So really, congrats on that. Like it's only been a couple of years, and that you're already securing IP, and there's this whole ecosystem built around story. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been
Yeah,
fascinating.
this is great. You put it so well. Yeah, thank you so much,
Oh,
Camila. Appreciate that.
all right. Thanks again.